Some places don't need ghosts to be haunted. In Vermont, nestled in the shadows of the Green Mountains, is a patch of land so steeped in mystery, even silence seems to whisper. They call it the Bennington Triangle. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 people vanished from this remote region, without a scream, a trace, or a clue. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just gone. Some places don't need ghosts to be haunted. In the southwestern corner of Vermont lies a stretch of wilderness so vast, so quiet, and so unforgiving that it's been called the Bennington Triangle. It's a place where 5 people vanished between 1945 and 1950, each disappearance more unsettling than the last. No struggle, no evidence, no bodies, nothing but stories swallowed by the trees. This is where truth twists into legend, and where those who dig too deep often find themselves lost. Mid-Dye Rivers, the forest guide who knew too much. November 12, 1945. 74-year-old Mid-Dye Rivers was no ordinary man. He was a seasoned woodsman, a hunting and fishing guide who had spent his life mastering the forest around Glastonbury Mountain. That day, he led 4 hunters into the mountains near Hell Hollow, a place already wrapped in eerie local folklore. The trip began like any other. Cold air bit at their cheeks. The leaves, long dead and scattered, crunched beneath their boots. The group trusted Mid-Dye. He was faster than all of them, even in his 70s. He always walked ahead. But on the return trek, as the hunters reached the last stretch of trail, Mid-Dye surged forward to scout ahead. They expected to see him just over the ridge. They never did. One moment he was there. The next he was gone. Search parties were deployed immediately. Over 300 volunteers combed the area with dogs, ropes, and floodlights. They searched rivers, ravines, caves. They found no signs of struggle, no clothing, no footprints off the path. Just a single eerie clue. A spent rifle cartridge, lying alone in the leaves, right near where he vanished. The town had no explanation. The mountains had taken one of their own. Paula Jean Weldon, the girl in the red coat. December 1, 1946. Bennington College was winding down for the winter holidays. Among its students was Paula Jean Weldon, a brilliant and introverted 18-year-old who loved painting, reading, and quiet hikes in nature. That Sunday, Paula told her roommate she was heading out for a walk along the long trail. She wore a bright red parka, jeans, and lightweight sneakers. Not the best choice for the rugged path, but she wasn't planning to go far. At least that's what she thought. Several townsfolk spotted her along the trail that afternoon. A man and his son even passed her at a fork in the path. Bright red coat vivid against the gray woods. They turned a bend, then looked back moments later. She was gone. Completely. Darkness fell. When she didn't return to campus, friends called the police. Her parents rushed in from Connecticut. Her father, a wealthy and well-connected man, demanded action. For days, the forest echoed with search dogs and shouting men. Planes flew overhead. Hikers retraced every step. Nothing was found. No footprints. No dropped belongings. No signs of wild animals. It was as though the woods had decided to erase her. The case dominated headlines. A young, promising girl disappearing in daylight. Didn't make sense. Rumors swirled: elopement, suicide, abduction. But those who knew Paula knew she wasn't impulsive. She was meticulous, careful, and she never would have left without a word. Her case became a symbol of fear, especially the image of that red coat. People began saying the forest had developed a taste for certain souls. James Tedford, the man who vanished from a moving bus. James Tedford, a 68-year-old veteran and resident of the Bennington Soldiers' Home, had been visiting relatives in St. Albans, Vermont. After saying his goodbyes, he boarded a bus back to Bennington, ticket in hand. Multiple witnesses, including the driver, saw him board the bus. He sat quietly, reading a timetable. Somewhere along the route, the bus made a few stops. At the final stop, Tedford's luggage was still on the rack. His bus ticket was in his coat pocket. But James Tedford was gone. He had vanished while the bus was moving, mid-route, surrounded by passengers, with no one noticing a thing. There were no reports of him disembarking. The driver swore he never saw Tedford leave. It was as though he had simply dissolved into the ether. His disappearance shook the town. People began whispering again, about the forest, about Glastonbury Mountain, and about the strange energy that seemed to pull people in, and never let them out. The vanishing of Paul Jepson. October 12, 1950. 8-year-old Paul Jepson was sitting in his family's pickup truck near the local dump, while his mother tended to pigs nearby. She was gone no more than 10 minutes. When she returned, the truck door was open. Paul was gone. Tracks led a short way into the woods before vanishing. Search dogs followed his scent to a crossroad and stopped. It was the same area where Paula Weldon had vanished. Paul had been wearing a red jacket. No body, no screams, no trace. His mother would later say that Paul had been talking constantly about the mountains in the days before, telling her he wanted to go to the mountains and never come back. Frida Langer, the only one found. October 28, 1950. Frida Langer, 53, was an experienced hiker camping with family near Somerset Reservoir. While walking with her cousin, she slipped and got wet. She told him she'd head back to camp quickly to change and catch up. She never made it back. Search teams scoured the area. Planes, helicopters, volunteers. Days of effort. Nothing. Until May 1951, 6 months later. Her body was found in a clearing that had been extensively searched earlier. Her remains were too decomposed to determine the cause of death. She was the only one whose body was ever recovered, and the only one not to vanish completely. A pattern forms, and the cover-up begins. By now, fear had swallowed the region. Hunters stopped going into the mountains. Tourism dropped. Old towns like Glastonbury and Fayetteville, once logging hubs, became ghost towns. Locals started calling it the Bennington Triangle. But one man, Harold Simons, a retired detective, refused to let the story die. He had investigated both Paula Weldon's and Tedford's disappearances. Quietly, obsessively, he began compiling his own data. He noticed something the police missed. Each victim had disappeared within a 5-mile radius of a mysterious stone cairn in the forest. All of them vanished between October and December, and all but one had been wearing red. Simons wrote a 100-page report outlining the pattern, but when he brought it to the local sheriff's office, they laughed. A week later, someone broke into his cabin. They didn't steal anything. They burned his report in the fireplace. Simons fled town, never to return. Some say he moved to Canada. Others say he was silenced. But in 1997, a hiker near the Long Trail uncovered a small, rusted lockbox buried beneath a cairn. Inside was Simon's lost journal. Dozens of pages. Theories. Photos. And on the final page, one message. "We've been looking in the trees. We should have been looking beneath." The Bennington Triangle remains one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Trees are still there. The trails are still marked. And hikers today still report eerie silence, vanishing items, disoriented compasses, and even, on rare occasions, footsteps that follow but never show a face. Some stories fade over time. Others linger, waiting in silence for the right eyes to find them. In 2023, Boston journalist Mark Whitaker took a hiking trip through Vermont's Green Mountains, seeking solitude, not a story. But near the Long Trail, buried beneath a cairn deep in the woods, he uncovered something that would drag him into a mystery 70 years in the making. A rusted lockbox. Inside, maps, case files, and a weathered journal signed by a name the world had forgotten. Detective Harold Simons. His final entry read, "We've been looking in the trees. We should have been looking beneath." Mark wasn't a believer. Not in ghosts. Not in legends. He had built his reputation on hard evidence, bringing down corrupt city officials and uncovering backroom deals. Paranormal. Folklore. Not his field. But something about the journal wouldn't let go. Inside were notes on every Bennington Triangle disappearance between 1945 and 1950. Mid-Dye Rivers, Paula Weldon, James Tedford, Paul Jepson, and Frida Langer. Their names were listed alongside dates, coordinates, and chilling red X marks. Then came two other names. Case number 6. Initials, AB. Case number 7. Initials, MW. Mark froze. MW, his initials. Written decades ago. He had no explanation. But he had a question burning in his chest. Why had Simons predicted him? Over the following nights, Mark read every page of Simons' journal. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the contents were focused and urgent. Simons had gone rogue after the Paula Weldon case was closed. He'd begun linking not just the disappearances, but oddities that surrounded them. Compass failures, local legends, strange behavior in search dogs, and sightings of figures in red just before the vanishings. He traced it all back to one theory. The forest was sentient, not in a fantasy novel kind of way, but something biological, something old. The stone cairns, Simons believed, were not trail markers, they were seals, ancient ones, anchoring something beneath the mountain. And in 1945, one of those seals had been broken open. The disappearances began soon after. Mark couldn't ignore it. He called his assistant, Lena Alvarez, a skeptical but sharp producer with a practical mind, and convinced her to join him on a quiet investigation trip to Bennington. Officially, it was a documentary. Unofficially, it was something else. The town hadn't changed much. Still quiet, still watching. They visited the library, the police station, even the Bennington Museum. There were archived articles on the disappearances, but anything related to Harold Simons was mysteriously absent. Then, after leaving the library, Mark found a handwritten note under the windshield wiper of his car. Midnight, behind the post office. Come alone. At midnight, Mark waited in the shadows behind the post office. The town was still, too still. A figure approached slowly. An old man, hunched, with cataracts clouding his eyes. He introduced himself as Calvin Rourke, a retired deputy who'd worked under the sheriff in 1950. I remember Simons, he rasped. Smart man. Too smart. After the girl in the red coat vanished, he wouldn't shut up about the mountain. Mark asked about the reports. They were buried, Rourke said. Not by us. By people who showed up in black cars with no plates. They told us to drop it, or we'd be next. Mark pressed harder. Who were they? Rourke hesitated. They weren't local. Weren't government either. They didn't blink. And then he said something that chilled Mark's blood. You think you found that notebook by accident? Back at the inn, Lena had found something in the notebook. A half-legible address scribbled beside case number 6. They matched it to an old farmhouse deep in the forest near Glastonbury Mountain, long abandoned, miles off trail. The next morning, Mark and Lena hiked through rough terrain, branches clawing at their jackets. Eventually they reached it. The house sagged with rot, its windows like open mouths. Inside, dust danced in beams of light. Then in the back room, Lena found it. A photograph nailed to a doorframe. A young girl, maybe 10, standing beside a moss-covered cairn. Her eyes bright, her jacket red. Scrawled on the back, Amelia Barnes, 1987. No official record of her existed, but the initials AB matched Simon's 6th case. Then Lena shouted from the floorboards. Beneath rotting wood, buried in the earth, was another stone cairn. This one cracked open. They camped nearby that night, too far to return safely. At 3:12 a.m., Mark awoke to the sound of tapping, like fingernails rapping stone. He stepped outside, heart pounding. At the edge of the woods stood a figure, ill, silent, wearing red. Lena joined him, whispering, "She's not breathing." They stared for a long moment. Then Mark raised his flashlight. The beam landed on nothing. She was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just the cold wind and the distant creak of trees. Back in Boston, Lena dug through newspaper records for Amelia Barnes. Nothing. No birth certificate. No missing child report. Like she'd never existed. Then came a breakthrough. In a Glastonbury antique shop, the owner handed them a box of old trail junk, found at a foreclosed property. Inside, a second notebook. It matched Simon's handwriting. The entries were more fragmented, more frantic. But one message stopped Mark cold. Case number 7 confirmed. Subject has found notebook number 1. Target MW. The entry was dated 3 days before Mark discovered the original box. 4 days. Mark hears whispers in the night. His lights flicker. Phone calls come from blocked numbers. Silent, save for the sound of breathing. Then one morning he finds a red glove on his kitchen table. He's never owned one. Next to it, scrawled in dust, one more seal remains. He's not the hunter anymore. He's the hunted. Mark Whitaker didn't ask to inherit this one. But once you step into the Bennington Triangle, the forest remembers you, knows your name, knows your past, and if you look too closely, it writes you into the next chapter. This is the final part of his story. 3 days. That's how long the red glove sat on Mark Whitaker's kitchen table. He hadn't moved it, hadn't told anyone it was there. He wasn't sure if it was even real anymore, but the world around him had started changing. His watch kept resetting itself to 3:12 a.m. Every mirror in his apartment was fogged from the inside. At night, the ceiling creaked, not with footsteps, but like something alive. Something breathing through the beams. He tried to leave Boston. The first time, his car wouldn't start. The second, a flight to Chicago, was mysteriously cancelled. The third time, Lena Alvarez, his assistant and closest friend, called him from her apartment in Vermont. Her voice trembled. Mark saw her. She was standing at the foot of my bed. She was wearing red. The forest had followed them home. They met the next day in a quiet diner outside Boston. Lena's skin was pale. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. I haven't slept in 2 nights, she whispered. Whatever this is, it's not done with us. Mark nodded. He slid a folded paper across the table. On it, coordinates from Harold Simon's second notebook. The final location, deep in the heart of Glastonbury Mountain, inside the government-closed zone. A place where time went missing and trails circled back on themselves. Lena stared at the numbers. This is suicide, she said. Mark replied. It's either us or someone else. The cycle ends. Or it begins again. They left at dawn. No film crew. No satellite backup. Just 2 people carrying backpacks filled with old maps, cameras, rope, climbing gear, and 2 handwritten journals that had already predicted too much. By noon, they crossed into the forest where signs warned of unstable terrain and forbidden access. They stepped over the faded caution tape anyway. As they hiked deeper, the forest grew quieter. Not peaceful, unnatural. No birds, no wind. Even the leaves underfoot made no sound. By sunset, their compasses began spinning. GPS units blinked out. And then they saw it. It stood in a clearing, 10 feet tall, wide at the base, leaning slightly to one side. Covered in vines. Swallowed by time. The last cairn. This one was different. Older. Not just piled rocks, but carved ones. Symbols lined the edges. Some looked like runes, others like ancient tally marks. Mark brushed dirt away from one side. Etched into the surface. Bound 1792. Disturb not. As he read it aloud, a low rumble echoed beneath the ground. Lena stepped back. Mark, something's moving. They set up camp 20 yards from the cairn, sleeping in shifts. At 3:12 a.m., always 3:12, Mark woke up choking. The air had turned thick, wet, metallic. He looked toward the cairn. A red light pulsed beneath the stones. Then he saw them. Figures, 6 or 7, emerging from the trees. All wearing red. But they didn't walk. They slid, like film skipping forward too fast. Lena joined him. They're not real, she said. They're copies. One figure stepped forward. She wore a tattered red parka. Her face, Paula Weldon. Instead, the air filled with dozens of voices. Male, female, children, layered on top of one another like static wrapped in whispers. You found us. You opened the story. Now seal it. Mark stepped forward. What do you want from me? To witness. To remember. To hold. Then they pointed to the cairn. The earth beneath it cracked. And it opened. Mark lowered himself into the opening. The tunnel spiraled downward. Walls slick with moss and heat. He descended for minutes that felt like hours. At the bottom, a chamber opened up. Huge. Circular. The walls were embedded with bones. Not buried, displayed. Children's skulls. Femur bones. Vertebrae strung together with red thread. In the center stood a stone table. On it a book. His own journal. Written in his handwriting. With dates stretching 3 days into the future. He flipped through it. Everything he had done since the discovery of Simon's lockbox. Everything he was about to do tonight. And on the last page. You have seen. You must now choose. Write your name. Complete the 8. Or leave. And the forest will take a child in your place. Above, Lena shouted down. Mark. It's collapsing. Tunnel shook. Mark turned to the table. There, carved beside 7 other names. Mid-Die Rivers. Paula Weldon. James Tedford. Paul Jepson. Frida Langer. Amelia Barnes. Harold Simons. One name remained. Mark pulled a pen from his pocket. His hands trembled. Then he signed. Mark Whitaker, 2023. The chamber went silent. A breeze swept through the underground like a breath held for centuries. Exhaled. Then the tunnel began to close. Lena reached into the hole, grasping his arm as the rocks began to fall. She pulled him out just in time. The cairn collapsed in on itself, sealing the ground like a scar. The red figures were gone. The forest went still. Just the chirp of birds returning. Mark and Lena returned to Boston in silence. At the hospital, doctors scanned Mark's body. They found no injuries but something else. Small magnetic shards were embedded beneath his skin, like fragments of a shattered compass. Lena developed the footage, but most of it had become corrupted. Colors bleeding, faces flickering, sound warped. Still, she uploaded what was usable. The footage went viral within days. Commenters were horrified, enthralled, obsessed. Government officials dismissed it as a creative fiction project. But those who watched closely reported something strange. They claimed that in the final shot, they could see a figure standing behind Mark, wearing Lena's face. 2 weeks later, Mark was gone. Vanished from his apartment. No signs of struggle. No digital trail. No body. Lena waited. But she knew. The forest hadn't taken him. Not completely. He had become part of the seal. An anchor. But then, she found something chilling in Simon's final notes. A line scribbled across the margin. There were never 8. There were always 9. Since that day, no one has vanished in the Bennington Triangle. The forest is quiet, but not at peace, because one seal remains. And the forest always remembers. All it needs is a name. So when you walk those trails, listen closely. To the whispers in the wind. To the breath in the trees. Because the forest knows you're there. And in the Bennington Triangle, remembering is the same as calling.